Thanks, Aoife. I suppose it might be a funny way to start off a talk to start with a caveat, but I suppose Peter Lefroy referred to it earlier. And look, I think that no matter what way we go about community engagement, we can accept that we're not going to get 100% of people on board and supportive of projects. But as Peter also said, there is an onus and responsibility on us to work in a respectful way and to engage in a way that we would hope will bring people forward with us. And I suppose it made me think to back in the day when I was going out and I was maybe in a bar and looking to chat up a girl and ask her out. And if I went up and asked her out and she said no, but she was still talking, I was saying, look, there's still a chance. Whereas if she didn't talk to me in the first place, well, then I knew it was going nowhere. And I think that's it's similar to engaging with people on wind energy projects. If people engage with you, they will you will keep working with them. So yeah, look, I've spent a lot of time in community engagement, and I've worked on a lot of different projects and with a lot of different individuals and communities. And I've worked both in Ireland and the UK, and look, there's a lot of similarities between the whole lot of them. Down through the years, I have filled different roles, and I've been the person knocking on the door and introducing a project to an area. And at another point in my career, I would have been the one who was at the end of a call when things had gone wrong. And one day I got a call to say a shotgun had been produced. And another day I got a call to say a vacuum tanker slurry had been spread over workers. And I suppose I mentioned those two cases for a couple of reasons. And one is that neither of them happen in wind energy projects. And I think that's important because we sometimes feel, I think, that wind energy is the most difficult thing to engage on. But I can assure you every infrastructural project has its own challenges. And the other reason that I mentioned them is that when after getting the call and getting involved with and working with the people, I was able to reach amicable solutions to the issues that were faced. And through that process, I ended up building a very good working relationship with the individuals involved. And I suppose that what that led me to consider was what had gone so wrong along the line to lead those people to getting so frustrated to take the action that they took. And when I pulled it all apart and looked at it, what I found was that it wasn't that the organisations hadn't engaged. They had given them information on what was going to be done, and issues had been raised, and they had people look at the problems and they presented solutions. But what I got to understand was that there was one very key ingredient missing, and that was involvement. Those individuals were not involved in any way along that process. And I suppose if you were to ask the organisations if they had worked in a appropriate and respectful manner, they would have said they had. But if you asked the individuals, they would have said that there was no respect there at all. So I suppose it just begs the question, is the provision of information enough, or do people need to be involved in the development process? And I would say that people do need to be and want to be involved in the process as it's being developed. And I think that setting the path for engagement with communities, that sometimes, like if you think about the way we might approach a community and individuals, we might say that, look, we've identified an area that is suitable for a wind energy project. But straight away, you're telling them that you've made a decision about their area before you've ever spoken to them. But if you consider that maybe against a slightly different way of starting off, and I suppose a statement that I would see is probably more accurate, is that we've identified an area that we believe warrants consideration. I think straight away you're setting the foundation for a more open type of engagement. So at Statkraft, how do we develop our projects in a way that we hope is seen as respectful by people? And look, there's a couple of fundamentals that we would build in, and one is that we engage early. So we engage during the design phase, and when we don't have all the answers and we don't have everything worked out. And sometimes it might sound counterintuitive to be going out and talking to people when they're going to ask you questions you don't have the answers for, but that actually is the point. And the other thing that we do is we go out and we meet people. So we get out on the ground and we call to the doors and knock on the doors, and we make every effort possible to meet people in the local area and to discuss the project with them. And when we're given feedback, we don't just put that feedback into a folder and up on a shelf, or just include it in a paragraph in a planning application. What we look to do is to actually incorporate that into the design process. So I would see it as a very robust approach to community engagement. But I suppose the thing about it is that it is hard on time and it is hard on resources. And I suppose I've been quite lucky with the senior management team in Element Power and now in Statkraft that they've backed this approach and that they've given us the resources and time to do it. And it's not just in terms of resources and time in getting out and meeting people at the doors. It's also where you're working on a design path and a particular aspect of a project, and we're out talking to people, and we might be coming back to the designers and saying, I know you're working on that, but look, we may need to reconsider this. And there is a resource and time requirement there as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these because there's probably too much there, but I thought it was important to put up in just to show that every project and every community will have their own story. So if you take Cool as an example, we had 18 turbines there with a 500-metre setback. And it was the setback and the number of turbines that were the main issue there. And what we got to understand was that what would generally be seen as more acceptable in the area was fewer turbines, but an increase in the tip height. And Moan Van was actually a very interesting one as well, because we were working on a substation location and a site access that on paper looked perfectly fine, but when we actually got out on the ground and got talking to people, what we found was that they actually weren't going to be appropriate in the local context. And I suppose, look, the other projects, each of them have their own story. And in terms of when we go out and engage with people, we aren't just saying, well, okay, how can we work the design best? We also look at how can we actually deliver real and tangible benefits to the local communities. And what's interesting is when you get out and talk to people on the doors and you knock door to door and talk to people, is that it's not necessarily the community activists that you're meeting. You're meeting with people who just don't have the time to maybe involved in the community, but they still have very good ideas, and this process brings that through. And when you're bringing it forward and going back to people with it, they can see their own stamp on the project. So, in terms of the way that we approached Moan Van, we engaged at an early stage in the design process, and we had those one-to-one calls. And it's not just one call to a house, it's you call, you give people information, you allow them time to consider that, and you go back and get the feedback. And on Moan Van, we had 4 to 5 calls to each house, and there were 54 houses within a kilometre of the 12 turbines, but we actually had over 550 individual meetings with 113 houses in that area. And we dropped, I think, almost 1,000 brochures in the area. So maybe I started earlier and I gave a couple of examples of where engagement didn't work. But just to balance that, maybe there was an individual we called on Moan Van, and for the purposes of today, we'll call him Tim. And when we met Tim and we presented a 15 turbine design layout, and Tim looked at it and he said, I don't like the look of that project. I don't want that in my area, and I will be opposed to it. And I suppose when I explained to Tim that it was a design layout, and for us to go back to the designers in terms of developing an application that we would be bringing forward into the planning process, for us to say to the designers, well, Tim doesn't want turbines anywhere within 10 kilometres, that wasn't going to inform the design process. So when we delved into the issues, what we found was that there were turbines on 3 aspects of his house. He had shadow flicker. The minimum setback was 500 metres. The road outside his house was open to construction use. And as Tim said, there's nothing in this for me but inconvenience and hardship. And when we went through the process and we developed the design and ended up going back to Tim, we didn't have turbines on 3 aspects of his house, they were on 2. We had eliminated shadow flicker. The turbines were moved 100 metres further away, and we had committed to not using the road during the construction phase. And because of the engagement in terms of the community benefit with himself and his neighbours, there were actually real and tangible benefits for him from the project. And Tim said to me on the last day, he said that he wasn't a fellow that was too easily given to changing his mind, and he didn't do it too often. But because of the way we had him approached the engagement, that he would welcome that project to the local area. So I'm not saying that you'll get that every time, but what I am saying is that even from difficult positions, you can get positive results. So in terms of where we would see community engagement and what our aim is and what we, I suppose, want from it, is that we want to develop viable renewable energy projects that are suitable and appropriate in the local context, and that at the end of the day will provide a financial return. We're looking to develop positive long-term relationships with the local community, but through including them in the design process. And we're looking to deliver real and tangible benefits to the community that is led by the community, not by us just putting them forward. And what we're trying to do is to encourage that involvement in the development process, and through that to develop a sense of ownership in its broadest terms of the projects, because people will see their own stamp on the project. And it's working with that concept of the energy citizen and getting people to buy into the whole thing. And look, at the end of the day, I suppose what we're looking to do is to work with all stakeholders and the communities to deliver effective climate action. So I suppose just to finish up, in terms of responsibilities for 70 by 30, government have responsibilities in terms of policy, and I think we've all seen down through the years where one wrong move in terms of policy could set climate action back decades. But with the code of practice and RES, things have gone in a very positive direction in terms of policy. And from a community's perspective, there's also a responsibility there, because there's a responsibility on individuals and communities to be open to considering projects. It's not that they have to accept every project that comes their way, but they need to have that openness to considering how they might actually work in the area. And I suppose for us as developers, there's a responsibility on us to try and create that situation where that openness, first of all, can be created and exist, and then once it is there, to work in the best way that we can with communities to get that buy-in that we need. And with that, I'd like to say thank you.